Okay, so here's what I'm gonna do. First I gotta insert some variables in here to control speed and such. So this one's gonna be player speed. All right, player speed, and it's going to be a float. And by default, I'm just going to set it to 90 units. All right, 90.0, bam. And then we'll do another variable, and we're going to say turn speed. Okay, so basically you can drive forward, backwards, that's player speed, so throttle in a sense, and then turn speed, which is turning. Okay, so there's going to be another force for that, and that will also be a float, and I'm going to set that equal to 50.0, bam. Okay, so that'll be that. Now the other thing I need to do is have a variable that's going to hold, because basically what we're going to do is you're going to have the arrows that go up and down, right? Or ASD or whatever. You have a throttle, right, that you're using with the keyboard. I need to have something that's going to hold the value that it's going to multiply that times the player speed. So in this case, it's going to be power input, variable power input, and that's going to be a float. All right, and we'll have another variable turn input, and that's going to be another float. All right, and then I'm also going to need a variable to hold the car rigid body, okay, because that's what we're going to have to apply this to. So I need something that's going to actually hold that, and that obviously is going to be of type rigid body, bam, okay. And then I need another variable that basically just tests that we are touching the ground, because obviously you can't be moving forward if you're not on the ground, because then the tires aren't touching and you can do anything. So it's going to be a Boolean. It just means true or false. All right. So once I declare my variables, I'm going to use a function, and not start, but awake. Okay, and awake happens before start. It's the first thing that happens when the game starts. The idea usually on awake is when you like hook things up before anything happens. So what I want to do is I basically want to assign my car rigid body variable that I had made up here. Okay, I want to basically assign the rigid body that's currently on my object to it, so that way I can connect with it. Okay, and so I'm just going to do get game the game object, and we go get component. Okay, of the current game object this is on, and I'm looking for a rigid body. All right, and so basically that's just when it first starts off. You know, usually when we make scripts, sometimes we'll be like, okay, I'm going to drop, it's looking for something to connect to, and we drop it on there. This is just automatically going to attach it to this variable. I don't have to do it manually. It'll do it through the code. Okay, so then we're going to use function update, and update is good for, it's based on every playing frame. So in this case, we want to use it to capture our inputs. Okay, so our power input, which was the variable we wrote up here, we're going to give that the input dot get axis. Okay, not guessed, but get axis, and we're going to say vertical, hashtag vertical. All right, so it's going to look for the vertical axis, and I'll show you that in a second. And then we're going to do turn input, turn input. And we're going to set that equal to input dot get axis, and we're going to make this horizontal. Okay, boom, boom, boom. All right, so just to give you an idea of that, Command S, I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go down here. And it didn't like something I wrote already. I didn't even do that much yet. Let's see. Oh, I didn't do a semicolon. All right, Command S, see that again. And good. All right. So basic idea is I'm just going to go ahead and drop this onto the player up here so you get an idea. What you'll see is that we see where it says car rigid body. A lot of times we'd actually have to like go from the player and then drop it in there. That's how we sometimes do things. This will automatically using, oops, let's undo that. This will automatically through the code, it'll find it. That's what we did when we wrote that one part. But the idea is here, it's going to, the power input and the turn input is going to be based off of when you push the key. So if you watch when I hit play, you'll actually see when I push up arrow, see how it goes up, see how it goes to value 1. Now if I push down arrow, it goes to -1. If I go right arrow, or if I go left arrow. So basically it's a whole range between those. And what get axis does, as opposed to the way we did before when we said, key code, up arrow, down arrow, that'll only work with up arrow and down arrow. You can see if I hit W, it'll also work, and so will S, and then A and D. What this does is there's presets in this. So if you go to Edit, Project Settings, Input, what they do is that there's these automatic built-in inputs, and we're doing horizontal and vertical access. So basically, this has a whole bunch of options. So like if you're working with a keyboard, it will look for like these things here. But if I'm using a mouse or if I'm using a joystick, it will use any one of those all together instead of saying specifically has to be this one button. So it's much nicer. So what it's doing is saying if the horizontal axis is being used, then do that, and that's basically we're setting that to the inputs, okay, the turn input and the speed input, and it's getting it from the horizontal axis and the vertical one. So that's actually where that's coming from as far as the code's concerned, okay. So if you for some reason want to change those, you can change them there. But that's why I'm saying input get axis vertical. It's looking at that, okay. All right, now what we're going to do is so that part's good. We're going to do a function. Fixed update. Okay, so this is based off of physics. All right, and it's you know how like the frame rate might change while you're playing a game. This will not change. This is so fixed update. So this will run consistently the same speed. And anything that's dealing with physics, you usually want to use a fixed update, not the other update. Boom, boom. Okay. So we're gonna okay. So in a sense, what we want to have happen, I'm going to write this in a kind of a backwards way so you get an idea. We want to have happen is this. We want the car rigid body dot, and that's that variable that's holding our rigid body for us. So we want to apply onto that the add relative force. Okay, that's just a built-in method of that. And we're going to go 0 because we don't want to move on. It's x, y, z, 0. So x, we don't want to do anything. 0, we don't want to do anything. But z, we do. We want to do our power input, which is when we're pushing the button down, right? So up or down, that's power input, which goes 0 to 1. That times, where are you times? Times player speed. And that's just, so basically it's going to multiply it times what we set the max speed on. So if it's 1, it's going to go up to 90, and if it's 0.5, it's going to go half that speed. Okay, so player speed, because we determined our speed up here. All right, so player speed, boom, boom. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. One more, come on, Command C, yeah, Command V, and it's covered. And now this is not going to be add relative force, it's going to be add relative torque. And torque is kind of the same thing as force, it's turning as opposed to it's turning as opposed to pushing. Okay, so we're going to go 0x, and then actually we want the last one to be 0, not this one. So I'm going to cut that out, delete that, Command V. So that's not, and it's going to be not power input, but turn input. I think that's what I wrote down, right? Turn input, yeah, turn input, and then times turn speed. Okay, and then the last thing, 0, because we want it to rotate in Y, because it's going to turn this way and this way. All right, so so X, Y, Z. Good. All right, so we'll just go ahead and we'll save that. We'll go in here, and let's kind of show you why this doesn't work to an extent. So if I hit play, and if I push forward, well, it's backwards right now, but if I push this, what you'll see is that regardless of, okay, watch. If I go like this, I can drive my car without touching the ground, which is not natural, right? So if I go like this, I can keep pushing up, and I can push down, and I can drive it to whatever direction I want. So even if it's floating in the air. So what I need to do is I need to have a way of testing that it's touching the ground in order for it to actually, so that it's not, so I can't drive it in the air. It's not a plane, right? It's a car. So to do that, I'm going to have to make something to test that. So the best way to do that is another built-in function called onCollision. onCollision. Enter. We don't need any arguments. Okay. And we're going to say basically if this object collides with something, so on this terrain, if you look, it actually has a tree collider, it has a terrain collider, and basically that means that when something hits it, it will say, hey, it'll automatically do a function of collider, and this has a box collider. So when these two colliders meet, it will make this function happen. These other ones, this one happens as soon as this script turns on. This one happens every frame, and this one happens every physics step, okay? This one only happens when something hits it, so that's the idea. So we're going to say if this enters something, if it enters a collision, we're going to say that ground is equal to true, okay? So we're going to say, yes, that means ground is happening, all right? But that only turns it on. I need something to also turn it off when it's not colliding with something. And for that, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be function on collision exit. So if it exits and it's not colliding anymore, ground will then be false, okay? So basically it's just going to test that it is touching ground or it's not touching the ground. Now what we need to do is we need to make it so that these here don't happen unless ground is true. And that's relatively simple to do. You probably already know what I'm going to write. I'm going to write if, and I'm just going to write ground. So if ground, if that thing is true, then it's going to run this bit of code. I'm just going to tab these in so that it's nested nicely. It's going to run this bit of code. So if ground's true, do this. But if ground's not true, if it's not touching the ground, then you can't add any forces to it. And that's the idea. So I'm going to save that, click back in here, and then when I hit play now, you will see that, actually let me do this for you too so you can kind of see it. This might help. So look at right here. See where it says ground? Right now it's not touching. Now watch. It'll say not, and then boom, now it touches. And that's because it's making contact. So watch. Boom. See how it turned off? Now watch. As soon as I hit the ground, boop, turns on. And turns on. Okay, well, it's still working even though. And that's basically what it does. So I'm only allowed to add input if I'm touching the ground. So I'm in the air right now. I can't drive it, okay, which is what we want. Now, really, I should probably make a special collider that's only on the ground part of this. So if he's flipped over, if the car's flipped over, you can't actually drive it. I didn't really get that fancy with it, but you could do that, okay? Now, another thing I need to do is right now my keys are backwards. When I push forward, it actually goes backwards. So all I got to do to fix that is I could write it in the script, or I'm just going to do the lazy man's way, and I'm going to put a minus in here. And now what that means is that it's going to multiply times a negative. So now when I push forward, it goes forward, and when I push back, it goes back. And if you notice your rotate's weird, then you can fix that as well. Okay, just put a negative number if it's going backwards. But it should, if you do the one, the other one should be fine. And that's basically it. Okay, and then you can just adjust these speeds if you feel like you need to adjust them. But yeah, that's pretty much, it's not really much of a racing game, but you get kind of the idea. All right. So when you're done with that and you're happy with it, you would save it, and then you would just do file, do the build settings and build it. Okay. So build and run, add current scene. I'm going to save as a Mac, whatever, and I'll hit build, and then I don't know, I'll just call it race build. We'll just call it race. All right, and save, and then it will compile it, and it will script it, and so on and so forth. Okay. And that is that's good. Okay, so good luck with that.